on. 1, 2, check 1, 2. 1, 2, check 1, 2. Oh, is it for the camera or is it separate?
I think it's separate.
1, 2, check 1, 2. Whoa, here's something. 1, 2, 1, go.
Jessica, are you checking the mic? Oh, you can hear it.
You can?
Okay.
I was like, why are you talking?
I guess it's
can
like
hear
a
you.
live stream or something.
Oh, good.
Okay.
I'm ready when you are.
All right, welcome everyone to Newman Night, the first one for 2025. Can I get something? Awesome.
Praise Jesus.
It's honestly a miracle that we're here because it's been chaotic. It's been crazy up in here. And we are so blessed, not just to have a building and be able to be here, but to have such an amazing guest today. I've personally heard him probably a couple times within the past, 7 years. I remember a big one was the Theology of Body Congress in Ontario, California.
Were you there?
I was there.
That's amazing.
I was there. It was amazing. I think I still have a journal with like my little notes I was taking with you.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I've gotten a couple, I know at Seek, you've been at Seek,
sure.
and a couple of different events, so, because I've also traveled to big Catholic conferences and stuff like that, so it's really exciting for me, so I'm really excited for all of you. He has a really fun fact, and I'm going to share it, that he is a father to 8 children.
Same woman. Same woman. Just clarify that. I'm like Nick Cannon or something, right?
Yeah, and not only that, obviously he's an international speaker. He was also on the board of directors for Theology of Body, so I'm just really excited to hear anything you want to share tonight. We welcome you, and then with one round of applause, let's welcome Mr. Damon Owens.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Is that even working? Oh, that's not even like centered. Hold on a second. Let's fix this. Whoops, that looked right. That was there? Oh, that looks right. Yes, oh good. Hey y'all. It is a delight to be with you all. And as you've heard, I've been around a little while, but have a tremendous passion, as you're going to figure out, to not only marriage in general, my marriage in particular, but a real wonder, a fascination with what God has created with marriage. And it's not academic. I am not an academic. I'm a theologian by training, as opposed to by profession. It's more that the proclamation of what the more I study, the more I learn, the more I live marriage, my own, and speak about it and meet so many, the more I'm just in awe of what God has created with marriage and family. And to the point we're seeing that it is a central role of anything we speak about in terms of our faith as Christians, God's plan for us in the faith, but most importantly, our ability to draw people to Christ. Ability meaning desire to even do it, as well as a compelling call, something that actually grabs at the heart of what people desire, even if they don't believe in Christ, if they don't believe in the Catholic Church, even if they're enemies of both. There's something fundamentally human about belonging to someone. There's something fundamentally human about belonging irreplaceably to somebody. It's a deep foundational need and desire. And that personal need, that individual connection with that is a springboard, it's a door to literally proclaim everything about our faith. It's an accepted lived experience of people, a need, a desire that's so deep and fundamental, they'll even listen to a Christian. They'll even listen to the gospel, the kerygma of like, here I was before I ever knew about Christ, here I met him, and here who I am now. That story will always kill it. But when you can speak that story to a felt need of someone, you couldn't get rid of them if you wanted to. That's the secret about both living and being a witness to Christ, is finding those real fundamental human needs that cannot be answered in any full way in anything but the Creator. And it's far from manipulative. It's the exact opposite. It's accepting people as they are, where they are, in what they need and when they need in those different seasons. All that has just fascinated me along with the real burden and challenge of being a husband to Melanie, right? A good husband, the husband that I wanted to be, the husband I pledged myself to her, April 24th, 1993. You've been married 32 years coming up in April. It's amazing. Still like an out-of-body experience using that number, like 32 years. But it's not one big blob. It's like these sequences or seasons of years that we've spent together. Good, bad, and ugly sometimes, but we stayed together. And as you heard, the Lord blessed us so far with 8 children. All boys except the first 7. I'm going to use that until I die, because it's just the story. We had 6 girls, and then had a couple of miscarriages that really rocked us, and then we adopted a little girl in 2009, Olivia, and Nathan came to us. He's our surprise adoption. That's when the agency calls you. And they're like, hey, we got this boy. If you could watch him for a couple of days. I'm like, we'll watch him. We don't give babies back, but that's on you if you do that. So that's what we have so far. And I'll have to show the pictures. I got some things. So I have 3 grandbabies, which I'll show you in just a minute. My oldest, Naomi, has a 3-year-old Marin, a 2-year-old Robbie, and a 8-month-old Maximus, I call him. Maximus Decimus Iridius. He's my baby there. But in terms of where I'm coming from, organizations that I connected with and work with are all folks who are in my orbit, in this passion and different dimensions of it. My wife Melanie and I have a ministry called Joyful Ever After. Literally our tagline is get the marriage you want from the marriage you have. And this is a heartfelt need of not just ministry to couples, but ministry with couples. It's a pivot in the sense of just giving information about marriage, which is one way, or the one is helping couples to recognize that they're the only experts in their marriage. You don't call experts to help you live your marriage. You call experts to help you to see how you can live your expertise. That's a whole mindset shift. So instead of ministering to couples, we minister with them so that they can live on God's work there. But much of that is skill-based work, learning fundamental things about communication, conflict style, temperaments, how we respond to different stimuli, and we're all so different. And if you just recognize that you are unique and unrepeatable, that there has never been another you, and never will be in all of eternity. There's a vast mystery in how unique each one of us are. There has never been and will never be another you in all of eternity. It's not a testament to you, it's a testament to the God who is the author of all creation, that he personally customizes each one of us. So what happens when a unique, unrepeatable person marries another unique, unrepeatable person, and they vow and pledge themselves to each other? That means you're going to have a unique and unrepeatable marriage. One that has never existed before, and no like it will ever exist again. So there's no cookie cutter. There's no 7 ways to make your marriage great. There's the discovery of yourself and each other in relationship. So the whole view of marriage, even if you don't personally participate in it, the whole view of what marriage is not the institution that puts you in the box and now you're with somebody for the rest of your life. It's not the institution that says you can only have sex with this person now because you promised it. Or there's a whole other moral order because of that's not what it is. It's a state of life that you freely enter. One that you come to the deepest and fullest discovery of who you are in relation to another person. This is where you discover whether you're patient and how patient are you. You discover all your virtues. You discover your tolerance for pain and what really makes you angry. You discover what brings you joy. And these are all things that can't be discovered in isolation and solitude. You can imagine what brings you happiness. You can imagine things, but you don't know it until you experience in relation to another person. So marriage as its fundamental mindset is about recognizing my uniqueness, the unique call to love to a particular other unique person, and together making a free pledge to live our lives together. Not living separately, but an intercommunion, interpenetration of all our desires, our hopes, our doubts, our fears. Literally belonging irreplaceably to someone and working that mission, not just toward the happiness in the moment, but toward a great purpose of why God created marriage in the first place. That's the other mindset shift, that we don't marry and create something on our own, even as it's unique. We enter into something that was created by God directly. Marriage is not something we self-create. Marriage isn't a contract and an arrangement that we sort of come up with our unique sort of ideas of what people try this all the time. And all I say is just watch the fruit. There's no judgment on people. Just watch the fruit. When you try to create something, you get a different result. When we struggle and try to live God's plan for marriage, recognizing Him as the author of marriage, then it also comes with its own promised outcomes. It comes with its own law. And by law, I mean immutable truths. A law is an immutable truth, an unchangeable truth. It's not something imposed on us. It's something we discover when we relate to God. That's a whole other talk. I talk about law and law imposed on us, laws that we, but when we speak about these unchangeable truths, they end up being things that we desire already. It's the path based on the author of the creator of how to get the very things that we desire. So we assent to this marriage, hoping that our unique, unrepeatable self and meeting this other unique person, that together we can live what we could not create on our own. That's the heart of it. We sponsor what's called the Catholic Marriage Summit under Joyful Ever After, Melanie and I. That was right in the beginning of COVID, had 39,000 couples over a weekend, hearing witness talks from other married couples, and it was a real time of openness, and it was very beautiful. One of our big deliverables here for couples is what we call epic intimacy. And I'll weave some of these things throughout. But we find that the theology, the spiritual reality of marriage, there's always a need to teach that, right? But that's not what people are asking for or what they need in the moment. The vast majority of couples that we've worked with, and again, we're approaching almost 70,000 couples, the vast majority of them simply haven't been trained in fundamental human skills. Communication, verbal, nonverbal. Understanding how you give and receive love, setting expectations for a partner, conflict, I mentioned conflict resolution, temperament. There's a whole lot of human things that are meant to be part of our formation in the decades before we give ourselves in marriage, in the family. And it's not just our modern age, it's a different tip, but there's always something missing. So there's a preparation that in a certain sense makes you capable of choosing one of the great vocations. And it's the same human formation for men and for women to choose marriage, or what we call celibacy for the sake of the kingdom. It's taken right from the scriptures. That could be the priesthood, it could be religious life, you could consecrate yourself to a bishop, there's lots of dimensions of that celibacy for the sake of the kingdom. But the power in it is the free choice. That you freely choose to give yourself in this state of life. And the two great vocations of marriage and celibacy for the sake of the kingdom both require a certain level of human maturity. We call it a human affective formation. And it's so important that even our priests have a very first year in the major seminary called the propedeutic year. And the propedeutic year is the year where you're really just learning how to live in community. You're learning how to interact in a way that is probably, because of our current culture, deficient in the family you grew up with. It is so important to live the vocation of priesthood in brotherhood that they literally have intentionally formed a first year of that discovery and freedom to do that. And so it's the same with marriage. We need time to learn how to give and receive ourselves in love if we want to live this. And those are natural skills, relationship skills, making friends, being vulnerable, being able to spend the time to enter into each other. It's very human, but it's essential. And that's what we do here in Epic Intimacy. We teach emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, intellectual intimacy, and communicative intimacy. Just 4 categories to get to the experience of being received by another totally, and having the faith and the courage to give yourself to another person. And this is probably the biggest. We had about 39,000 through this. We had almost 22,000 couples go through this so far, because it's something that people you just can't get anywhere else. And finally, Communio. There's another company that I work for, organization, and we help to do all of this work to make the parishes capable of doing it. Building teams at a parish level that can receive singles, helping you to be marriageable, helping you to find a marriageable partner to choose from, helping marriage preparation that's connected to the entire faith life. Marriage is in crisis, that there's a capacity, skill, vision, and ability to help couples when they reach an inevitable time of crisis. And normative marriage enrichment. How do you just continually feed and pour into your marriage? It's the auto analogy of getting regular oil changes instead of waiting till your car smokes. Like, how do you know again? Well, my car's smoking, maybe we should get an oil change. That's bad planning, right? But you get these oil changes, whatever you believe, 3,000, 5,000, 6,000, whatever it is, because the regular changes when there's nothing wrong keeps these things at bay. And the same ought to be with marriage enrichment. It's not, but it ought to be thought of that way. That we pour into our marriages on a regular basis so that we can continually learn to grow in intimacy. So all these things you mentioned, they're all connected. And if you want to learn more about any of those, that's my quick response code to move through and learn more. That's my family. Those are my babies. And actually, I guess, that's 2019. I got to get that updated. And that's my new son, Rob. And he's finished his 6 years with the Marines. They were down in North Carolina for a while. Now they moved back up with us. So they're all great and near us. But most importantly, my grandbabies are near me. All right, so there's Marin, Robbie, and Max. These are my buddies. I miss them. It's already been 4 days. All right. Yeah. I was really struggling just to figure out, of all the things that I want to share with you, like what's like hitting. And I didn't want, I'm not going to give like a big, detailed PowerPoint presentation. That's not really my style, but I got so much freaking content. It's like, I don't know what's going to light you up. So I hope even what I present sort of gets your imagination, maybe some of your memories, some challenges with stuff. This is the kind of stuff that you need to wrestle with and really poke at it, because it can take it, right? These things can take it, but it matters how you engage with it. So I'm thinking about just speaking about the distinction between the culture that we live in and its relationship to marriage, because that's where we're all in, whether we're single or married or engaged or whomever, we're in this culture, right? So let's put some of this stuff to the test. Let's wrestle with the culture that we live in when it comes to marriage, and then compare it, if we can, compare and contrast with what it is that God, Christ, the church is calling us to when we speak about marriage. And there's a gap there, obviously, right? There's a gap between what's proclaimed in marriage through the faith and through the millennia and what the culture speaks about. And that, to me, should be a good conversation. I got some geeked out stuff we could talk about, too, if you want to get into some of the technicals, like what is love and, what is love. Some really cool stuff. But it's cool to me, so I'll wait to see what you guys say about it. We call this a cultural revolution that's happening right now in the Western world. And there's a lot of great books and analysis about what this means, but essentially we're experiencing right now not just an age of change, like things are different, people are not, connecting themselves to worship centers, considering themselves Christians or connected to faith. People are not marrying nearly as much. The divorce rate is still ridiculously high. Children aren't growing up with mom and dad in the home even for the first 18 years. There's a lot of changes, but the key point is that it's not just an age of change, but that it actually is a change of age. We're moving as a culture from one age to another. And if you want some more detail on this, there's a wonderful book called From Christendom to Apostolic Mission. It's a short book, probably 90 pages, just punch you right in the gut, comparing what the church has already been through. This is not unique in human history. We go through these ebbs and flows of culture, of adhering to certain authorities, rejecting certain authorities, taking common values in things, the collective assumption of what things are and what's good or not. Every culture goes through these seasons. Many of them collapse, but then something else rebuilds again. And we're moving right now from what we call a Christendom to a more apostolic time. And what does that mean? If you remember your scriptures, and if not, I'll explain it. There are a couple of stories in the book of Acts that talks about the early days of the church. I mean, literally like the first early days of the church, like Pentecost, Holy Spirit, apostles coming out of the room, preaching Christ in all the different languages, and 3,000 were converted that day. And you hear these stories, and you're like, dang, they were on fire, right? They're preaching, everybody hears it in their own language. In the early days, they're in Jerusalem, they preach Christ, and 3,000 convert in a day. Then you read further along in Acts, the book of Acts of the Apostles, and you hear stories of guys like Paul after his conversion, St. Paul. And he goes out of Jerusalem, and he ends up in Greece, in a place called the Areopagus. And he's in the Areopagus, and he's with all these smart academic people, and they're all standing around these statues of all the gods, the Greek gods. And he sees one statue to the statue to the unknown God. And he thinks, oh, this is my end. This is what I do. He says, I see you have a statue. You're a learned man. You have a statue to the unknown God. Let me tell you about him. His name is Jesus Christ. So he's in the culture trying to find something relevant to them and show in an authentic way how God shows up in their culture. Does anybody know how many converts he had that day? 0. It doesn't mean he was wrong. It doesn't mean it was a bad approach. It's a different culture. And those two examples are the examples in this Christendom versus apostolic time. There's a time when people already have a common cultural understanding of what we hope for, what we expect, and what we remember. And when you speak into that, people say, that's what I want. And people immediately get it. That's kind of Christendom. There's like a cultural Christianity that holds sway with laws, expectation, stigma. There's things that we sort of we don't have to speak because everybody already agrees, right? But then sometimes you come out of that culture, you go to a different culture. And there's a whole other set of what's good, bad, what's right, what's wrong, how we build a whole different set. What we're experiencing now in terms of this change of age is that right here in America, we're seeing that shift from shared, assumed beliefs, sort of a Christendom, to a new apostolic age where we can't presume we share values with anyone. And the hard part is that we're experiencing the entire shift. We're experiencing it because we have certain, maybe you guys are a little younger, but there's a memory of how you say something and how everybody understood it. It could be words like marriage, love, fidelity. There's a whole lived, hoped expectation that's there. And now we're in a place where all of those words are still there, but it's almost like a zombie reality that the outside is there, but the soul is gone. There's a whole other different explanation or definition even of what marriage is. There's a privatized explanation or definition of love. What's love to you is love to me. You got to ask somebody, what do you mean love? There's no presume that everybody understands love in the same way. So in that sense, we're watching, even in the Western world here, this cultural change that we can no longer expect common expectation and belief. This is that still weird opening from the Olympics. This was the Olympic opening ceremony. I've been looking at this for a year and I still can't figure it out. But it was meant to represent the people of the world. So this was a certain worldview that was put through artistic formation that was meant to represent all the nations of the world coming together. And every Christian in the world looked at it and was like, what the junk? It's like, what is that? There's a place here as believers that we have to look and see who are we as a church in this revolutionary moment. A couple of facts here, just put in your mind. There's been a 31% decline in marriage since the year 2000. This isn't a hand-wringing. We're not making judgment, moral or otherwise. This is just an observation of what is the culture we're working in. That's nearly a third fewer marriages in the last 25 years. Since 1970, as part of a larger decline, 65% fewer marriages since 1970.
Is this like accounting for the fact that people are just getting very older?
It does.
So
that's the.
If you renormalize what an adult is it still 31%?
I suppose you could.
But I see your point.
No, I'm not. That's a good point, because one of the other things that people have looked at, social scientists like Brad Wilcox, and there's a couple of those I show their books in here, is another way to look at it is the age where humans in the U.S. or in the West form lasting unions. So that could be cohabitation, living together. It could be, long-term dating. And what's interesting is that even as marriage ends up later, as you've identified, getting married later, there's still an age of like the 22 to 26 where longer-term relationships are attempted outside of marriage. Right? So there still seems to be a point of formation where we're still looking for a partner, even as the actual marriage age is closer now to 30, up about 7 years, in the last 50 years. Yeah.
I mean, I think when it comes to, I don't think you can look for a partner. I think the only thing you can do is prepare for marriage.
Just prepare and not look for a partner?
Yeah, it's just like, it's just kind of like, I don't know a video game, so it's just kind of like, it's just where, like for instance, like one of my favorite games is Chrono Trigger, right? And one of the cool things about Chrono Trigger is if you go inside the secret forest and then buy the silver sword, like pretty much the whole entire game is really easy. And so how I just kind of interpret that is just more of when you spend time by yourself alone and you level up, and then once you level up, you have everything that you need, and then your partner just comes to you.
Interesting. I'd love to think more about that. I see some truth in that there is some fundamental human formation that makes us, we call it marriageable, right? To even be able to enter into a long-term, to give yourself the maturity to receive another person as unique, unrepeatable, and to pledge yourself one to the other. So that may be the silver sword. That may be sort of that interior, intrapersonal maturity and formation to be able to enter into a relationship. But I do think there's an intentional choice at some point, though, to not only be ready, but to make yourself available to others, to be present, to be in groups like this, even just to be present. So I think there's some good truth to that. But what's interesting here in this case is that marriage in and of itself is no longer the cultural expectation for building a life. In fact, to that age question, Dr. Brad Wilcox talks about what he coined this cornerstone marriage versus capstone marriage. And again, this is descriptive, it's not derogatory, it's not going out, it's recognizing that the cultural expectation has always been, up until the last 40 years, that you marry and build a life together. This cornerstone of building your life and building it together. Not everybody, but sort of the middle broad of the bell curve, it's the expectation. Where today, it's shifted to what he calls capstone marriage, where you get your degree, you get your job, you go with even advanced degrees, and you get financially secure, and then you marry. Whether by intention or just because it takes 12 years to finish your MD and JD, right? But you find yourself later marrying intentionally because you've kind of gotten yourself together in a place that you feel like you can marry on your terms. Now there's a broad sort of brush there. Everybody's got a story, and it's not meant to be put you into a box. But there's been a mindset shift, is my point, between cornerstone and capstone marriage that has to be accounted for here. But even with that accounting, we're looking at a third fewer people marrying. 65, in fact, sacramental marriage in the Catholic Church is down 75% since the year 1970. That's a cultural change about where marriage fits into my vision of what it means to be happy, fulfilled, the expectations of what my life will be like. Now that is obviously a mix of people who want to be married and can't or haven't, and the mix of people who've intentionally said, I don't need marriage to be happy. So just observing that is instructive for us without making any judgment yet, just looking at the culture as it is and how it presents itself and how we expect to be happy. But it has consequences. Again, without judgment, we're trying to look at what the data reveal and what happens when we choose not to marry or when we don't stay married. For the first time in America's history, the majority of adults are not married. Just observable fact. 24% fewer babies are being born today than even 2007. And that's interesting because even if you count for things like abortion or for, infertility, those things have always existed. But something about 2007, there's an intentional decision not to have children and not to have them within marriage. What do the households look like? In 1970, it caused a lot of concern. When you look at all the households in the U.S., only 40% had a married mom and dad with kids. Now, the goal is not 100%. Everybody gets a house. It's not that it's some objective number that's good or bad. What's interesting and necessary to observe is that since then, that number has dropped below 18%. Fewer than 18% of U.S. households consist of a mom and dad and kids. There are all kind of other household form structures, and again, we're observing, we're not making judgment. We're looking at the lived experience of our peers in the world regarding marriage and family life, those formative years, those first two and a half decades as we're forming and becoming who we are being experienced very differently now than they have been in the recent past. And we need to be attentive to that. We need to be aware of that because it's going to adjust and affect our expectations about people we meet, the lives we plan together, our expectations of what lifelong happiness, joy, relationship, belonging, what those things actually mean when it hasn't been part of your own experience. Half of all young adults under the age of 35 lack married parents. That's a consequence. What happens when we don't experience those years? This is social science data, some from the CDC, some from some of the UN organizations. This is not religious data, but the connection between that formation has been connected causally to shorter lifespans, generational poverty, an epidemic of loneliness, and increased mental illness. And there's deeper explanation to all of those things, and I'll give you some references, to look through with those. But it's also very logical. Like if the formational years have not been ones of irreplaceable belonging or experiencing, resident fatherhood, we spent a lot of time talking about that, resident fatherhood, it has to have some effect in our formation. And the connection that's been made almost with the hand wringing from the government has been, yeah, we see the connection, but we can't do anything about that. So we're going to create other organizations and other, helps around that. But acknowledging full hand that the household lived experience is the most formative indicator of outcomes, social science outcomes. Go ahead.
So yeah, with my personal story, I grew up with a lot of domestic violence. And so one of the things that I did for myself and why I chose to take a long period just to get my mental health right and making sure I got everything in line. Because I was 286 pounds at one point.
Wow.
I was 286 pounds. I cut out my own cancer. I literally had cancer in my chest. And then because I literally watched 4 to 5 years of surgical videos, and I learned how to do it myself. And then after that I learned how to breathe better, and then I became a professional dancer, professional singer. I do squats. I can do a lot of squats. I'm trained in two-handed katana, sword. Two-handed katana, sword, spear, staff, bow staff, and nunchucks. And then I broke both of my hands in boxing training, and then I'm an elbow fighter. But one of the best things that, honestly though, one of the one of the toughest lessons I learned when I broke both my hands in training, it was just more of like, I can't touch my wife. You know, like I can't like love on my wife, like my hands are broken. You know, and like I was thinking about it too, that's when I was living in the hood too. So it was like I was living in Long Beach, and like you can't go around telling people you have two broken hands. You know? And it just taught me how to just be gentle. You know, like it really taught me the value of being gentle and how important it is for when I do get married to remain gentle because of my background.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. And that, you know, those stories of recovery, those stories of making choices of your own, still give witness to, you know, what happens when that's not part of the normative formation, right? We all have to overcome something.
Yeah,
we all have to
like,
just be able to do that.
Yeah, just because like like when I would train, it wasn't because I was angry. Like I was just thinking about protecting my heart, like all the time, like what I had to do as a kid. And so it was just like, but I was able to kind of finally get all of that energy out.
Yeah.
And then, you know, see the end result, like, you know, fighting is really lame. I love
Right.
just remain healing, you know.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Just a couple more in here, and then I'm take some questions, and then if we have time, I want to pivot to something a little bit else here. But what's happening here? Whoops. I lost my PowerPoint.
Because like I grew up and I was thinking like, damn, why my mom like? Because you know I recently lost my father, and
Yeah, so it's just not advancing here, but it's not advancing
my
there.
mom is the best dad ever.
Yeah.
Can I?
Oh yeah, yes sir.
So, another question for you.
Yeah.
You know how you're saying that we're seeing less marriages nowadays?
Yeah.
And I heard that sometimes, you know, when we grow up, we choose our parents, you know, to marry. Like you choose your mom, you choose your dad.
Yeah, right.
So, if we're following those type of habits and, you know, patterns, what do you think it will take for us to, like, get out of that? Because if we're seeing that our parents are not together, then why should I be together, right? Because before there used to be a lot more marriages, so it was a norm. Oh, my mom, my dad were married, they had me, so I have to get married and also have my kids. But now it's like, it's not the same case.
Yeah.
Right, so what do you think it takes for us to like overcome that or like interrupt the patterns or?
Yeah,
you know,
great question.
What kind of stuff have you learned or experienced?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's the right question, right? I think one is sort of acknowledging that we're in this unique time, but also to avoid nostalgia that somehow, even in higher marriage rates or, you know, getting married and staying married, that they were somehow happier. Obviously, the decline in marriage, the rise in divorce, which we'll talk about here as a result of this, the most recent sexual revolution, throwing off a lot of authorities, government, church, everybody, right? There were still issues that were there in real marriages that were not being addressed. There was abuse, there was infidelity, there was pornography, there was all kinds of real things that were there. And in response to that, it was the outright rejection of marriage. So to say everybody should get married shouldn't gloss over the challenges that were there and still exist now in being happily married, joyfully married, purposefully married. So I think what you're asking specifically about, you know, marrying one of your parents, marrying one of, I think that's neither good nor bad. I think it's one of those things this is. There's a familiarity with temperaments. There's a familiarity maybe even with physical look, you know, just things that are familiar to you. And I don't think that's bad or good. I just think it's a human thing that we gravitate toward what's familiar. But that's not a guarantee either of failure or success in marriage. You have to do the same work that was lacking then and the same work that's needed now. And by we work, and this is where my recommendation comes in, it's in that bucket of being marriageable before you're married and of accepting the particular work to stay married well, to work on your marriage. One of the myths regarding that is that a couple can sit down and work on their marriage. And it's a myth. It turns out that, it makes more sense in the theology of marriage, your marriage is the fruit of how you how you show up for one another. It's a fruit of. It's not the agency. It's like I'm going to change the steam that comes out of the. Well, you change that by changing the heat and the differential between the cold and the hot.
So external.
It's an external. That's the fruit of the real things you actually have control over. The sphere of influence, the sphere of control, are really about how I show up to Melanie as Damon in every moment, even after 32 years. My patience, my presence, my ability to listen, my sacrifice and giving what I want good now for something better later, that sacrifice, making that gift, receiving her as she is, letting her have her moments, letting her be herself. And I'm not always like that. Sometimes I'm just tired. I'm hungry. I'm impatient. Somebody else at work pissed me off. And I'm coming home and so I'm showing up differently. So regardless of the temperament that you're attracted to, regardless of the memory of where you come from, one of the great, beautiful realities is that we each have the power to determine the love in the moment, regardless of the circumstance. It's great agency and freedom. Now, you got a lot to overcome with your memory, a lot to overcome with hurts that are really hurtful, things in your memory, but also things that happen right now that remind you of a hurt from the past, and you have a decision about how you're going to act still. So the real skill work is about learning to nurture a reverence for your spouse that will affect the way that you show up to them.
So remind, what does reverence?
Reverence, thank you for asking that. Pope Benedict says, when he was Pope, 2005, 2014, what is reverence but a spiritually mature form of wonder and fascination? So what is reverence, like reverently kneeling before the altar, reverently bowing before others, is really the fruit of wonder, like, whoa! When you can go from a whoa to a, oh my God. It's a spiritually mature form of wonder and awe. So the reverence for your spouse begins with that wonder and awe that usually begins when you first meet. Or with that moment that you fall in love, or love at first sight. And there's a wonder, you're like, this, when I met Melanie, it was June 24th, 1989. I remember the day. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I've been on Berkeley's campus for 3 days. 40,000 students, I'm from New Jersey, so I'm looking at all these beautiful women. And I walk into this graduate school engineering party, or not graduate school party, and she's standing there with like 7 other beautiful women. And there was a moment I was like, whoa! And that whoa is different now, 36 years later, but my reverence for her flows from that. And I think that's what's essential. You were very patient. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Don't mean to get in the middle of your slides, but
Don't. Please don't.
I think
Death to PowerPoint.
I think a question that might be useful here is something I've been thinking about in sharing the faith with other people. I'm an engineer, so I'm thinking about trying to talk to scientific people, people who care about data. And one of the things that seems like is an important point is in a lot of the questions that Catholics get, whether it's LGBTQ rights, abortion, stuff like that. It's all a mindset about sexuality that's entirely divorced from the Catholic life. Mm-hmm. Like if you're going to get old school, like Catholic standards are, it's not just sex that's off the table. It's like making out is entirely off the table until you're married. So you're all of the stuff that is normally a question is just so far removed from the Catholic experience that like even trying to look into that from the outside is something that you're just not going to get unless you spend some time exploring
Sure.
the differences.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we're talking about marriage, the United States is somewhat difficult in this sense, and that there isn't a common law marriage option. The government doesn't consider you married if you live together longer than X amount of time, as opposed to, say, Britain, England, where they do, the UK. So I guess my question is, as we're talking about the changes in marriage, is marriage a word that's actually useful if we're looking at the culture? Or is what you and I think about when we say marriage so completely different from what the culture sees as marriage that the words actually don't mean the same thing?
Yeah. I literally came from a conference on this week in San Antonio. I kid you not. This is the question that folks in evangelism are asking. And part of the pain with that is that, and this is just fact, it's not us versus them, whoever them are, in 99% of the cases, there are truths that precede the modern notion that are taken by the modern culture, gutted, and then presented back with a different meaning. So marriage existed before the Supreme Court. Marriage existed before government. Marriage existed before the church. Marriage is a primordial human connection, even with the diversity of definitions, or not definitions, the diversity of experience. So there's common law, there is romantic marriage, there are arranged marriages, there are polyamory, polygamy, multiple. There are different forms of it, but there's a core truth about what marriage is. That's the union of a man and a woman that has the capacity to create a third. It's imminently sexual. That has never been questioned. And whether a man has two of those wife partners, or you met each other because of arrangement with two kingdoms, fiefdoms, or whether your parents, regardless of how you come together, the core truth about marriage is that when a man and a woman give themselves to each other in their totality, body, soul, emotion, being, it has the capacity to create a third person. Therefore, it impacts everybody, because this third person needs 2+ decades to mature. And the question is, who is going to be attentive to mature this new person for 2.5 decades? And we all know by experience and history what happens when babies, kids are not attended to on a daily basis. If you don't, spend a week in Rio. Spend a week in Kingston. Spend a week in some of these cities that have a whole population of children that is their own subculture. It's dangerous, it's lawless, it's careless. We're dangerous. We're dangerous human beings when we're not formed in a family. That's just a fundamental fact. So, society's understood that marriage has a particular meaning up until now. So it literally is a fundamental, definitive redefinition of marriage, that sex has nothing to do with marriage. That's what happened in 2014. All under the cover of same-sex marriage, Oberfeld, under the cover of LGBTQ rights, which was all true, the real core and the challenge of it had nothing to do with same-sex or other. It was whether or not sex had anything to do with marriage. And our Supreme Court stepped out of pocket to say sex has nothing to do with marriage. It can if you want it to, but you can be married and have no capacity to create new life, and we'll call it marriage. So the challenge with that is, to your point, what do we do when things like marriage, which had a precedent, it had a preceding meaning, purpose, and understanding? What happens when that word becomes part of a culture that rejects that meaning and definition? And then they bring back to us, well, it's marriage. And the question is, do we keep that vocabulary? Do we keep those words that were ours from the beginning, that were co-opted and now become zombie words with a new soul? Or do we create new words to express old truths? And I have leanings here or there, but I'll move with whatever the predominant thing to move with that is. Because the reality is, we only use words to convey reality. The whole purpose of words, verbal speaking, is to convey truths to one another in a way that we go, oh. We call that an apple, not because it's objectively an apple, but because we've assigned a meaning and an understanding of what that particular type of fruit is. So when I tell you apple, you don't hand me an orange. So some things are relative, But what's most important is that there's a common understanding of reality that we can share one to the other. And when it comes to fundamental things like marriage, love, faith, belonging, when we start to change those meanings, we start to change literally the reality that they represent.
Yeah, I love that point. I just wanted to add a little additional story to this. Part of where this question comes from was the idea that the Catholic experience is, in a sense, fundamentally different from anyone else's experience. That concept comes from an experience I had back in 2012 at the university. I would attend the Atheist Club as the Christian. You have to have the token Christian.
You have to. Yeah.
Well, you don't have anybody to go after. So.
You can't be atheist unless there's a theo, right? So you got to have a God that you don't believe in. Otherwise, there's nothing to talk about.
It's no fun to just sit around and bag on somebody who isn't there. But excuse me, I lost it. So this was about the time that the gay marriage discussions were starting to really heat up, right? And so I don't know, they all got together and decided this is what they were going to go after me for that night. And somebody said, well, you know, you're a Christian, are you against gay marriage? And I said, well, yeah. And you could hear the entire group inhale.
And salivate. We got one. Yeah.
I'm like, well, here we go. And one of the guys who was there, who was solid atheist, but knew Christianity better than most Christians, knew Catholicism better than most Catholics. Before anybody could say anything, just said, oh yeah, no, that's fine. He's Catholic. Everybody said, what? No, he's Catholic. If you allow gay marriage in Catholicism, you actually break Catholic theology. He's not Protestant. Protestants are different. This is Catholicism. He's fine.
He accepted the rules of engagement, basically. Yeah, okay.
He was like, yeah, Catholicism is fully consistent if you accept the grounding assumptions. I just don't accept the grounding assumptions.
Yeah. So what you're calling grounding assumptions is what I was getting at in terms of even a Christendom as a description of a culture, even if everybody's not Christian in it. There's just an acceptance of those fundamental principles, those first principles that all of law, ethic, culture flow from. And yet, because we're human, we use words for that. So what happens when words change meaning but the words remain? You change the way that we convey reality to each other. And this was what was nearly impossible during probably 2008 to 2014 before the Oberfeld decision. I was very involved in on both coasts and nationally with it, and tried to keep this middle road to record that this is not an argument against homosexuality. This is not a movement against same-sex love. It's just not. It's a question about marriage. And this is what marriage is. It doesn't erase, it doesn't, demean other relationships and the freedom and decision that we make. It's a fundamental question of, as a culture, what do we mean by marriage? And is there anything unique and particular about marriage as it's understood that requires reverence? Even allowing all kind of other relationships, if we change the definition of marriage, we will change the cultural expectation of how we relate to each other in intimate relationships. And that was like trying to be rational in the middle of a WWF fight. It's like, it's just nobody wanted to hear that, and still don't. But we're seeing the fruit of it. That's kind of the fundamental point. I like our discussion. Do you want to turn any direction, any of your thoughts, challenges?
We're just going to take a quick...
Yeah.
Sorry, thanks.
Go, no, please. No, yeah.
Just before we transition into more Q&A discussion, we are going to take just a 5-minute break, just recognizing the time if anybody does need to leave beforehand. I'm also going to go ahead and do announcements real quick, and then we'll kind of let everyone get up. You can clear your plates away, and then everyone who's able to stay for Q&A. We'll resume that after.
Great.
Okay, Damon?
Perfect.
Okay, real quick, our announcements. Next Friday, we have our first Friday, February 7th. We'll start at 6 p.m. Yeah, not this coming Friday, the Friday after that. Have 6 p.m. mass followed by confessions, praise and worship, and then a pizza dinner to follow here in the Newman Center. All young adults are welcome to that. We also have an awesome opportunity for young women for this period up until Easter. We're doing a women's community called Magnify 90. So it's a program that's been put together to just encourage women to grow in virtue and just come together in sisterhood. We really haven't done something like this at the Newman Center before. So we meet every Thursday night just to kind of check in on each other, pray together. That is 6:30 p.m. All of this is on a flyer, so you don't have to remember anything I'm saying. A couple other things. Our friend Christopher Pinto is leading the Epitha series. Christopher is a professor of ASL over at PCC, and he's running a 4-part series just teaching some intro ASL lessons. I went this past week. It was awesome. So much fun. I learned a lot in an hour and a half. So the next one is on Monday. Previous participation is not required, so you're welcome to join us here in the Newman Center, 6 to 7:30 with Professor Christopher. And finally, our next Newman night will be at the end of February with our lovely Krista. She'll be speaking on, I believe, the dignity of, nope, just kidding, take it back. What are you speaking on, Krista?
Well, TBD.
TBD, okay. It'll be lovely. So same timing as tonight. Please, before you leave, pick up one of these flyers with the February calendar on it as well. That's at the back table. So let's go ahead. Everyone can take a stretch break, get what you need. You can say goodbye for the night too if you need, and then we'll reconvene in about 5 minutes or so.
Awesome.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Fellow engineer. No, I got it.
Yeah, right?
I'm convinced it's a state of mind. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
I think I have to head out too, but one of the things I wanted to ask is, do you think there's, one of the things that I think is fundamental, and I think this is what the guy was getting at in that group, is that the Catholics actually don't budge on the must be able to have kids part of marriage, right? Like, female reproductive systems are weird, but like if a man is infertile, you just can't get married.
That's right.
Period.
Yeah. Actually, it's really specific. It's whether you can actually engage in the marital act. It's not even conception. The measure is just because we can't control conception. It's not a moral issue if we can't have control over it. But we do have control whether and how we enter into the marital act. In other words, intercourse.
Right.
So if you cannot, like you have no penis, you have no ability to enter, then that's an impediment to marriage, but not conception. I deal with that so often with people who throw that back at the church, like, how are you going to judge people if they can't have kids and infertility? Like, we don't.
Right. So, do you think that's? I mean, it really only applies to Catholics. So that's the.
And that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
But do you think there's any benefit in even just attempting to like inform the culture of this is what Catholicism actually teaches, and being very specific? These are the actual requirements, not whatever random megachurch pastor told you. Like, this is how Catholicism is.
I think it is. It's always helpful for clarity. There is, I think we need to acknowledge there is a significant group that don't want to hear the truth. That shouldn't stop us. We also shouldn't convince ourselves that, oh my gosh, if I give them the truth, they're going to go, oh, that makes sense. We have an incredible ability to self-delude. All of us do. I do. So